30 more seconds, and then we are going to get started. I know it's lunchtime, so everybody's probably grabbing some lunch, and then we'll be joining us. But welcome, and feel free to use the chat to say hello or tell us how you're doing. I was thinking about it would have been fun to do a poll today on a scale of 1 to 10. How much chaos do you feel like you're living in? And I was trying to think of like, are you a Matthew McConaughey and dazed and confused level of like you're a 1, you're right at the bottom of the chaos spectrum, or are you? And then I was thinking, who's the most chaotic person I know? And I'm really addicted to Curb Your Enthusiasm right now. And I always think of like Larry David as being somebody who just seems to be in a perpetual state of chaos. And I'm like, where is everybody on this Matthew McConaughey to Larry David spectrum of chaos right now? That would have been a fun poll to to start
to ask.
with.
Yeah. I mean, it really depends on the moment,
Oh my gosh, that is the truth. That is the truth. All right, so I think we're going to get started. I know everybody's kind of coming on in. Welcome everybody who's here so far. Nice to see some familiar names here. So welcome to our Ask the Expert series. I am thrilled to have a very, I was going to say old friend / colleague, but that makes us sound old. But like, I think we met way back in 2012. So Nicola and I were on a really interesting leadership project together. And what I think about that project was that we were at this fabulous 5-star resort in sunny Southern California. Which I wonder if they're still even doing that program anymore. I know it's been running for years.
This year.
Did it? Yeah, because it was a beautiful, I think it was probably one of the best gigs I ever had, that's for sure, back in 2012. So it was great that we got to reconnect on this. And Nicola is a life and success strategist. And today we're going to be talking about the work that she's been doing in this space of helping people kind of, live their best life and find some balance. So she's the author of a journal, so not a book, but it's a journal called Calm the Chaos, and she's released a deck of cards to complement it. So as we get started, I just want to remind everybody that we're going to keep the lines on mute, but please do use the chat. And as with all of our programs, this is not about really, Nicola and I, it's around how you guys, what do you need from today? And so as we go along, Shelby's going to be monitoring this for us, and so she'll monitor the Q&A. So feel free to put your questions in the Q&A right off the get-go, and but we're going to get started. So for those of you who maybe don't know me, I think I know most everybody who's on the call right now, but just in case, I'm Glain Roberts-McCabe, Glain like shine with the Roundtable, and we do this series just as a way to, kind of keep our saws sharp. And also I feel like this one though is like high therapy right now, because I was, as you were streaming on, you might have heard me say, where is everybody on the chaos-o-meter when it comes to surviving this pandemic. So I want to kind of rewind the tape though a little bit, Nicola, with you, and tell us a bit about how you got, what prompted you to actually write your journal in the first place, and kind of bring this out into the world. So give us the backstory.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to be here today. I love reconnecting you with you, even though it's virtually not as fun as being at our 5-star resort, but it's still great. So the calm the chaos concept really came from this journal that I created, and it really was something that I created for myself. 15 years ago, when I found myself, starting my new coaching business and found out I was pregnant, and especially then after I had my daughter, and I also had a 4-year-old stepdaughter. So I was juggling a lot, and I was looking for ways to help myself manage it all, right? The career, the kids, the marriage. And what I was recognizing is that the way I wanted to show up and the way that I wanted to feel was not translating well. And so I started researching a lot about health and happiness habits. And so all of this information, that I share with clients, it's in the journal and the deck of cards. It's not new information. It's stuff that's out there. It's things that have been researched before. It's really just provided much more kind of intangible little bite-sized ways so that people can really process those and integrate them into their life. So the journal, I came up with the prompts myself to really have a way that each day I could stop, pause, take stock about how I was taking care of myself, what my intention was for how I wanted to show up and what I wanted to get done. And as I created that for myself and realized that the structure worked for me, like I liked the idea of journaling, but being a mom, young kids, job, like the idea of actually sitting down and journaling on a blank page just felt very overwhelming and unachievable. So this kind of gave me that process. When I started using it more, and then as I started working, especially with women who are also juggling career and kids and marriages, I started sharing it with them and they really liked the process. And so eventually I self-published it. And I wish I had an old copy of the self-published journal, because people think that, that this was a fast, easy process to get this published, but it was really years in the making. And, and then, enough people gave me input on it that I made some tweaks. And then eventually I honestly would go to bookstores and look for journals and look at things that I liked the look of. And I found one publisher that I loved, that I really could see this being published by them. And I would envision it in the bookstore. I would envision it in Target. And sure enough, I got that publisher and it is in Target.
Yeah, I love it. Manifesting.
I know it took a
right?
while to get there, but it is really one of those things that I could just see it. Like I could see it on the shelves and stuff. And so I actually, and they made it so pretty. I mean, that's the thing, is the publisher that I really wanted to work with, they made it so pretty. So that's how that came out. And as I say, when people go, oh, you wrote a book, and I'll say, well, I wrote a journal. You actually have to write more words in it than I did if you want it to work. It doesn't work unless you put it to use. So it really is a journal to provide you prompts to take care of yourself, to be more centered and intentional for each day.
So tell me, so for people who haven't had a chance to see the journal, give me just one or two snippets of the kind of practices that you really encourage people to start to integrate into their day-to-day.
Yeah, it's very simple. So it's broken up between 2 days. So every day when you open it up, there's a page for today and there's a page for tomorrow. I wrote it and I use it at the end of the day. So I actually have it on my bedside table. I pull it out, I write in it. It's really 10 minutes or less. Yeah. I do it before I read and go to bed. So today is really kind of taking stock about how you took care of yourself, and those self-care checklist is, the stuff we know. It's research-based health and happiness habits, moving your body, eating to or consuming to nourish yourself, getting outside for fresh air, doing something pleasurable for yourself, those sort of self-care pieces. And then it also has you write down one memorable moment of the day, which I find very interesting, is that people will often find that the most challenging prompt when they're starting off. And I know for myself, I was looking for like this big magical moment, and then I would feel like, oh, I didn't have one. What I realized over time is that what I was writing down for the most memorable moment were the things, the little things that really matter. It was like my son reaching for my hand as we were walking, crossing the street at the age of 10, it was sort of these little things. And then it ends with gratitude, right? Yeah. So we know gratitude is proven, especially right now. It's so helpful for us to remember, what we're grateful for. That's the today page. And that's the same every day. And that's just to get you into that ritual of those are the things that we know. Research shows that when we do these things on a regular basis, they help us feel better. And then the tomorrow is all about really setting your intention. And those prompts kind of rotate through. So they're a little bit different each day, but that's really around, what's your intention for tomorrow? How do you want to show up? What are the top priorities for you that, if nothing else gets done, these things you want to, what's a courageous conversation you need to have? When you feel stressed, what are you going to do? So it's really about helping you think forward about how you're going to show up with intention the next day.
Yeah, I love it. And I think, when we were talking, there was one thing that you said, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so true, because we were talking about the pandemic. And I think mental health is on all of our minds right now as leaders, and, like our audience or people who are leading teams. And I always find like it's a double whammy for us as leaders, right? You're worrying about your teams, but you're also in the middle of all of this yourself. And one of the things that you really made me stop and think about it was this idea that when the pandemic started and we sort of didn't really know how long is this going to last, discussed, well, okay, we're going to be in lockdown for a couple of weeks or for 3 weeks or for 4 weeks. And I know you're calling in today from California, and, you know,
Yep.
here I am in Toronto. It was, you said, you know, we sort of were treating it like vacation. We were like eating like we were on vacation. We're watching TV and eating in front of the television. It was like this extended vacation. And for sure, the amount of banana bread that I baked in the last year, let me tell you, it's gone through the roof. And yet now we're in the, like that has sort of worn off. And I know for myself personally, it's very different to be sitting in the fall now compared to March, knowing that we're about to go into winter. We've had some restrictions come back in on us again here in Toronto. And it's really starting to, I think, for a lot of us, that we're really going through that Corona coaster again, the highs and lows.
Yeah.
And so I'm really kind of curious, as you know, as somebody who practices this stuff, what have you learned about yourself kind of as you've been going through this process? What are you noticing about the clients you work with? I know you do a lot of work with people around their own resilience, personal resilience, mental health. What are you noticing, and what kind of strategies do you think are really critical for us to lean into right now?
Well, so I will say, so, you know, we talked about the journal, and then the second, you know, piece is the Calm the Chaos cards. And this is a card deck. It's got 65 prompts in it that you can pull a card each day or when you're feeling stressed. And I'm shifting to talk about that because I created the Calm the Chaos cards last year. And I created those during what I thought was the most chaotic time of my life. Literally, like my husband had a significant health issue that came up, turned our life upside down in a day. And so I was thrown into this extremely chaotic time, a lot of uncertainty, so much day-to-day stress, still having to manage, you know, kids and career and worrying about his health. And so I was in that mode way before COVID. And so I learned what helped me through was so much of what I had been working with clients on for all these years in terms of just managing stress and what are the things that you can do, the little things that you can do each day or each week that help you stay afloat, right? And there's this thing, I think, you know, in the coaching world, especially sort of this focus on like thriving, right? You know, transformation and thriving. And yet what I realized was that when you're in the middle of extremely stressful times, times of crisis, you're not looking to thrive. You're just literally trying to survive. And so what I realized was these things that help people thrive and actually be more successful in terms of health and happiness. And I look at this as like your well-being, using well-being as your superpower. I did not really get it until I went through that time of how important that was for helping me navigate you know, these really, really challenging times. Now we're still in the midst of medical stuff. But while I was going through it, people kept saying to me, like, how are you handling this so well? Now, it didn't mean that I didn't lose. Can I cuss on here?
Of course you can.
Okay. It didn't mean that I didn't lose my shit. It didn't mean that I had days that I didn't want to get out of bed. It didn't mean it wasn't hard. But what I realized was that because I had the foundation in place about knowing to ask myself, okay, how am I feeling right now? What do I need right now in order to get through this moment or get through this time, that I could access that better. And so while he was in and out of the hospital, that's when I had this idea with the cards, which was, you know, I'm literally pulling these little things like, what's a mindset, a mantra that I have, you know, that I'm relying on. So one that would come up for me a lot was like when I'd start to spin about what's coming up in the future. And again, I'm going to relate this to what's happening now with COVID, because when COVID hit, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I've been practicing this for the last year. But when I would start spinning about, you know, all the stuff that was literally out of my control, I would just go back to like one day at a time. Today, I need to get through today. And what is it that I need to do for myself to take care of myself? what are absolutely necessary on my plate, focused on, I need to focus on what are the things that are out of my control that worrying about it is not going to help. It's just going to take me down. So when I started to pay attention to that, I realized like, oh, there's some little things, that I'm doing. And a lot of it was based on work I'd already done, content I'd already created. And so, I came up with this idea of the Calm the Chaos cards, and pitched it to the publisher, and they jumped on it, and they said, can you fast track it? Because we really want these available in time for the US elections in November, which, are happening next week. Not that there hasn't been any chaos around that, leading up to it. And in time for the holidays. And little did we know, these were launched September 3rd, right? That we would be in the middle of COVID. And so what I have found is that the experience that I had personally over the last year, it's put me in a place as I'm talking with clients, whether that's individual clients or companies, about being able to say, look, life happens. I mean, COVID is a collective crisis, and we all went into that, like, crisis critical mode. And yes, I think, people who had the, I'm going to say luxury, the privilege to be able to shelter in place and have their family close and, have food to eat. And, we kind of did go into like a little bit like, how do we make this fun?
Right.
But the way in which people were operating in that initially, I mean, there was a little bit of, how do we make this fun? And then for a lot of businesses and leaders, it wasn't about making it fun. It was just like, what do I need to do to personally get through? And what do I need to do to help my people, right? And my company get through. And so everybody jumped into kind of this crisis mode and started doing whatever it took to get through, thinking that it was going to be a relatively short period of time, or probably not even really thinking about it. And so now that we're 8 months into it, what I'm finding is that people are exhausted, especially those that are parents. People who are, not parents and maybe living alone are feeling really isolated. And so the mental health piece of it, I feel like that's kind of what's shifted with companies, is that it's not just like, oh, if you need some help, make sure you get support. It's like really recognizing that this is significantly impacting people's mental, emotional, physical, spiritual well-being. And so that's where I've been focusing is, where do we start to infuse those little things into life that keep us afloat? And I think as companies, there's what can you do from a company standpoint in terms of the culture that you're creating. But for individuals, it's so personal about what it is that works for you. And so that's what I'm really asking people is to pause. And that's what these tools are for, is like pause and really take stock. Like, what are the things that help you? And let go of the things that don't, but really being mindful about, does my energy go up when I do this thing? Or does my energy go down? Does my energy go up when I interact with this person? Or does my energy go down? And that's one of the, the cards. It's one of the tips that I use. And in fact, people can go to my website and download the Winning with Wellbeing Guide and Workbook. It's a free resource, and it's got a number of exercises you can do. And one of them is this help and hinder list. Really taking stock of what are the things that I do on a day-to-day basis that make my energy go up? What are the things that make my energy go down? And so that if you stop along the way of your day and say, how am I feeling right now? And that can be emotionally, that can be physically. A lot of times they're interconnected.
Yeah, connected.
Right. And then ask yourself, or look at your list and say, okay, what can I do right now to shift my energy to either get through this meeting or manage this tantrum with my child, or, just get out of bed again another day. It's very personal. Again, a lot of this stuff is the same for people, but I'm asking people to make their own kind of personal positivity, I say prescription for yourself first.
Well, and I think so much of it too, what you like in the work that we do, so much of it's with leaders and helping them shift their behavior and their mindset, right? And our mantra with everybody is you need to be intentional. Like a lot of us go into life and we're, it's almost like we're on autopilot and we're subconscious, but we don't even realize that that's what we're doing. And as I listen to you talk and I think about this card deck, I think about how parallel it is. And this is a subject we are terrible about talking about at work, but how this is so parallel to me around grief. like when I lost my father, I remember my mother would Skype me every single day. When she would see that I was online, she would ping me on Skype, and she would sit and she would cry for an hour. And, it was like that period of the year. Anybody who's gone through a loss, who's lost a parent or a child or like a close loved one, that grief is such an unraveling. And in our organizations, we've had a terrible, terrible ability to talk about things like this at work. And as a leader, you're expected to, like, I've got a few of my clients who've experienced horrendous loss, and they've had their 2-week bereavement, and then they come back in. Anyway, there is a book that my mother recommended heavily to, it really helped her. And what it was the book that you could open any day. You would just sort of open it up, and there was a prompt around being where you were right now with the grief that you were in. And it was sort of this, you would open it when you need it. And I think of that, when it comes to processing our emotions right now, I think there's a lot of people that are dealing with PTSD around what's been going on. I mean, I have a lot of entrepreneurial small business owner friends. It is catastrophic in terms of what's happening with people. Parents, as you mentioned earlier, that are dealing with things. And then meanwhile, so and we're working with all of our clients and, our groups and things like that. Meanwhile, you flip over to the organization that are still pedal to the metal. Let's get the profits. Let's go. So I'm curious, as individuals who are trying to balance, I don't even think it's two things. Like, I almost feel like we've got a 360 around us of how we're trying to balance all of these things. Being intentional, pausing to really, collect where you are and recenter yourself. Like, I'm hearing that as being so critical. Is there anything else that, with the folks that you work with, and I do really think, culturally, the US is in my mind, because I've worked with many US clients, and I always think, I'm exhausted. Like, you guys, like, we put the pedal to the metal at work. I feel like you guys really put the pedal to the metal. Yeah. So what can individuals do, and I guess what I'm really curious about, for those of us that are leading, what can leaders start to do to maybe release that pressure gauge a little bit when we are still having all of this shareholder pressure or performance pressure? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, and it's a really good question. And, what I'll start off by saying, and then I'll answer, what can you do? But what I'll start off by saying is, again, like, here, this is global pandemic, and yet there are a lot of leaders and companies that it's like the expectation is that their employees are still supposed to show up and operate the same way. And what's also happening is that people are telling me that they're working harder and more hours than they did before. Yeah. And we're hearing that too. One, because if you're a parent and your kids are virtually working, virtually going to school, or even if they're not, it's still all the complication that comes from, right? So if you're a parent, you're literally now working from home with your kids around, potentially a spouse around, people coming in and out. So your work day is getting pushed in to whenever you can get it done, right? So and then if you're not a parent, what I'm hearing is that there's kind of this feeling of like, well, what else am I going to do? The stuff I would normally do and socialize, I'm feeling, isolated. And so it's sort of by default, just working more. And here's what I would say leaders can do and really need to be doing is acknowledging to their employees and the people that they lead that this is a highly unusual time, that we all are experiencing a great range of, feelings and emotions. It's like acknowledging, like, I feel like that's kind of what's been missing is like this acknowledgement that this is unreal, right? Yeah. And so what's happened is we're super adaptable. And so people have just like jumped in and adapted. And I'm noticing of this a lot with people who are parents, right? They've just jumped in and adapted because they had to. They absolutely had to. But now it's become the new norm to be operating this way. And people are, drowning. They're not getting enough sleep. I mean, the number of people who are telling me I'm working from home, there should be no excuse why I'm not getting exercise. But they're not, right? Or the conversation around, well, tell me, because what I typically do with clients one-on-one is I'll say to them, like, take me from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. Like, I want to hear what your day is like. And they're getting up and immediately jumping on their computers. Yeah. And I'll ask them about like, well, what are you doing for lunch? Well, I'm eating at my computer, and they've got Zoom calls, or they've got like, and then they turn off their computer to shift gears. Like, let's say you have a family, but then as soon as the kids are, you know, handled or whatever, they're jumping back on to make up for the time that they were jumping in off. So I'm really looking at, you know, okay, how do you be more intentional? That's my favorite word, with designing your day now in these new times. And I don't want to say until we go back to normal, because I think that this actually gives us an opportunity to see how quickly we let work fill, you know, the white spaces in our lives.
Yes.
And so even if you don't have the kid activities to get to because those are canceled, even if you don't have the social plans because those can't happen, even if you don't have the commute time, which people would complain about, but now instead of taking that hour of their commute time to do something to take care of themselves, they're giving it to work, right? So I think it's a bigger conversation about how quickly we will let work absorb any additional time. And so therefore it requires us to be very, very intentional about what is the experience I want to create. And I want to go back to your question, like, about what can leaders do? This is the thing, like, the way that we feel has a profound impact on the way we show up for ourselves, for the people around us. So as leaders, we do have this dual role where we need to be keeping the business going. We need to be motivating our employees. We need to be, you know, available for them. And we also have to be like taking care of ourselves so that the way we're showing up for those people, our family members, our friends, the people that we lead, is a relatively positive experience, you know, because I think about this, like, we will look back at one point and this will be a blip on our timeline. Now, we don't know how long it's going to be, you know, is it? But it really is going to be like this period of our life that we look back and reflect on. And the question I always start with is like, so when you look back at this time, how do you want to talk about the way you showed up, the way that you felt, the way that you helped your kids navigate this, the way that you helped your employees or the people that you lead? So I do think that intentionality is so key, but the first thing we have to do is acknowledge for ourselves and the people that we lead that these are new times. And if we're not having a conversation about how are we taking care of ourselves through these challenging times, now it's just a reflection of life. As you were saying, if you go through an individual crisis, like a loss of a loved one, you're going through that in isolation, right? You take your 2 weeks and then you're supposed to jump back in and you show up and it's like, leave the feelings at the door. Well, now our work and our life doors are all meshed together. So I think that for us to not be able to stop and say, how are you, you know, doing today? You know, what support do you need beyond just getting the work done? I don't know. I feel like we're losing this opportunity because we're just trying to plow forward, you know, so fast, so hard. But
you know what, as I'm listening to you, I think that's what's missing, right? Like, I think one of the things that has really happened in work, and I loved how you said, you know, we've filled the white space, right? Like, so all the white space, we've just let the work kind of seep into those spaces. And when I think about work and what I find fascinating, because to your point, like, everybody complains about their commute and all of those kinds of things, and going into the office. And I've been for a long time a big proponent, say, like, why do you need to be, you don't physically need to be somewhere to be getting work done, right? We run a results only work environment here at the Roundtable, and, you know, you can work anywhere, just get your results done. But you know what we all notice as our team is just, you miss the camaraderie, you miss the informal conversations, you miss all of those kinds of relationship building. And so now we're in a pandemic, so we don't have that at work. And so what's happening is we're having Zoom calls and we're all kind of, you know, zoomed out. And depending on, as a manager, you know, if you're a high touch face-to-face kind of manager, my guess is you probably jammed a lot more management calls into your calendar to kind of keep on top of everything. And we've eliminated the white space that used to exist around relationships and rapport and supporting each other and building the collective. And then tried to do artificial things like, let's have happy hour and let's do Zoom trivia and let's do all of these kinds of things. And I think like that was the pre-wave. And then I think, as we look forward because who knows, it could be 6 months, 8 months, another 12 months. I don't know, like hopefully there'll be a vaccine. But, as we look forward, I think we need to adjust how we, I love this idea of like, let's replay with the white space, right? So if you were like thinking about, oh, there you are. I thought you froze for a second.
I know you froze too.
Did I?
No, you froze.
No, you froze. So thinking about when we think about, the next 6 to 12 months, what are some thoughts you have for how, I'm thinking about leaders and cultivating this in a better way within teams. I mean, one of the thoughts I've been having is to kind of create more balance and more space, really to question whether or not you need to be doing some of the things that we just automatically do.
Yes.
Like we automatically do an annual engagement survey. We automatically do a performance reviews, or I'm not saying you don't need to have some of those things, but I do question, like in our team, there's some things that I think, if we didn't do that, I don't know that anybody would really notice.
Yeah.
So it just relieves the pressure a little bit on.
Well, and that's one of the things with going through a critical time. So again, if I reflect back to the personal experience that I had over the last year, one of the things that I learned is that, when you're going through a critical time, it is a great opportunity, forced in a lot of ways, to put things in perspective. And that the way through is by eliminating the excessiveness, right? So, and that was one of the things I used to teach anyway, is like excessiveness, which I think is a made up word. I don't even know if that's a real word. It diminishes.
Sounds good.
I'm going to use it. It diminishes our experiences, right? The more that we, and I think about this even in terms of like, I used to relate this to, the holidays, for kids or their birthdays. It's like, if you just do so much, it actually diminishes the whole experience, for them in terms of the special things that they can pull out and feel good about. And so as a society, I feel like, and especially in the United States, it's about acquiring and accomplishing and achieving. And there's just this excessiveness to it. We translate that over to our children. And so what happens in a point of crisis or a critical time is that if you try to do all of that excessive in anything, you will not survive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of the first things when I talk to people who are new parents. It's like, if you try to do everything 100% as a new parent, you will not survive, right? So you have to look at everything through the lens of, just like you said, is why are we doing this? Is this still important? And my question I always go back to is, what is the purpose of this?
Yes.
Because if the purpose does not align with what your intention is for right now. And so getting back to like, what can you do? Like really, one of the key things is redefining success based on the current situation or stage of your life. So right now I'm asking people, I just did a workshop last week with a company, and I said to them, I want you to think about the next 3 months only. Right? Because we don't know what it's going to look like. Yeah. So if you look at it from now until 3 months, we're in the holidays, we're going to hit 2021. It's like, if you're only looking at the next 3 months, how do you want to define success for yourself in terms of the way you want it to feel for you, for the people you lead, for your family members? If you start with that intention, then everything you do, you can ask yourself, does this support that intention, right? What is the purpose of that? So like what you're saying is being able to sit as a team and say, what on our plate or what on our list, is going to support us all in being able to show up the way we need to over the next few months, is really going to help us reach our goals. But I think also as a company, if you're not reassessing what your goals and your expectations are right now, again, you're throwing and you're pushing at the people that, work for your company, the idea that we are expecting you to still operate at the same level, if not higher, achieve the same goals, in spite of the fact that we're going through, and your whole world has been turned upside down. So again, I think it's that acknowledgement piece, and then saying, okay, as we acknowledge it, what do we need to adjust
You know, and I want to jump in here because I completely am on this tour. And yet one of the things that I'm noticing, and I'm noticing it within myself. And so, you know, we work with a lot of type A personality people, and we have this motivator assessment that we make people do when we're trying to help them shift a behavior. And what I notice, there's a pattern within my group of clients, because, you know, it does tend to be fairly homogeneous when you're always working with the high performers, right? High performers tend to get a lot of energy from excelling, from enduring, from winning, from being in control, right? And so I find, and I'm married to somebody who's the opposite of me. So, because I fall into those categories myself. And I am married to somebody who is the opposite of me, who likes stability, likes predictability, likes the thing. Like, I'm good with change. I'm fine with things being a little bit chaotic. It's okay. But I have a hard time letting go of, these were our goals. Am I going to let all those balls drop? Ooh, really hard for me. It doesn't feel good for me. And I think within our teams, like if I think about my marriage, I'm always using my marriage as a bit of a barometer for me, right? Because I truly did marry my opposite in many respects. I mean, thank God for shared core values. But, you know, there's the way we sort of approach things are different. And so I think about when I think about the people I work with, and so the people on my team that also have either the same things where we can all drink the same Kool-Aid and go, yeah, we can keep doing this. Yeah, we can keep going. And then not realize we're slowly killing ourselves and burning ourselves out, to the other extreme where you have the people that really are dealing with this in a very different way than you are. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, you know, when it comes down to, because everything we do is about person to person and the relationships we have with different individuals. But how do you navigate that? Like, how do you navigate if you've got, whether it's a spouse or a child or a member of your team that is really has a different energy towards this whole experience right now? How do you bridge that gap?
Well, so what I use with my clients individually and as teams is I actually do, I'm going to say personality, but it's really like a work behavior style, you know, assessment. And it's not Myers-Briggs, it's true colors. And so it's a focus right on colors. And I find people can remember that easier and sort of relate to that easier. So I'm going to speak in terms of just the fact that, you know, I believe, and the work that I do proves this out pretty solidly, that, you know, there are these different personality style differences. And we all may have behaviors in all four of them, but oftentimes we lead, or we at least look through the lens, right, of a particular one or two. And so I agree with you. Like, I use a lot through my marriage of like, oh, this is an interesting testing ground, right? So my husband has, you know, done the colors, and it actually was pretty profound in terms of helping us understand the differences in our relationship and why those occurred. But I also use it with clients and their spouses and their kids as a way, because, and right now, again, we're in a critical time, you know, and I don't want to keep saying a time of crisis, because I think that it's shifting from that really like intense crisis, but I think it's still a time of sustained stress, right? And uncertainty. And for different personalities and styles, the way that they respond to stress is very, very different. And so again, I just want to go back to this idea of, as companies and as leaders, we can acknowledge we're in this time, and we can say, you know, let's talk about this, or what kind of support do people need. But this is why it's so important that things get personalized. And I think why it's so important for leaders to be making time for those one-on-one conversations is because how this person is responding to the stress is going to be very different than how this person, based on, you know, what their personality is, you know, what their the way that they grew up, you know, their own sort of values and stuff. And so I go back to, and this is from a family standpoint as well, and I've done this within my own family over the last 8 months, is we've had conversations. I have the flip chart at home. I mean, my kids think it's hysterical, but I am a lover of flip charts, and I find it very helpful. It's like we kind of have our family team meeting. I don't say that specifically, but you know, we'll talk about what's working, what's not working, you know, how are you feeling? What can we do to help this situation better. And what I've noticed is that the things that I thought I was doing to help my kids was not seen as helpful for them. And in fact, it was causing stress, and it's dependent on each of them because they both have their own styles. Same thing with my husband. And so what I would say is it's the same thing you can do with your family as you can do with your team, but you first as the leader in a business, or I believe as a leader or co-leader in your home, is you have to start with yourself first, right? And check in with yourself and say, what's working, what's not working? How am I feeling? Like, how am I really feeling about all of this? Where is my energy level? And then I think then when you can come to the table and say, so I've been thinking about this, and this is what I'm experiencing, and I'm wondering what you're experiencing, or this is how I'm feeling, and this is what I'm realizing I need to do. And I wanted to talk about, how are you feeling, and what maybe, do you feel like you need, or do you need from me? I think if we're assuming that everybody's responding the same way as us, we are going to be missing the mark the majority of the time. So it takes more work. It really does take more work to have those conversations with your family members or with your team. But I would like to see companies shift from, I don't know what's happening and why so many meetings are happening. I mean, meetings were already an issue when people were meeting in person, but it's like, it's unbelievable the amount of meetings that are happening. And if you're not, again, taking a step back now and saying, okay, this is not going away anytime soon. How do we redesign the way we do meetings, right? Like, who needs to be on the meetings? How long do these need to be? Because if you don't have time to meet with people one-on-one, and they don't have to be long once you have those initial conversations about how, what do you need and that kind of thing. But if you're not having those touch points with people individually along the way, you can't really gauge how people are doing, on a Zoom call with a bunch of other people. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but I do think that it gets back to that idea of recognizing and acknowledging that we're all going to show up and respond differently during times of stress. When it's not happening collectively, we don't know a lot of times what's happening behind somebody else's closed door that they may be bringing to the table. But we know right now that everybody is going through this situation. And then whatever's happening in their personal life on top of that we may not have any insight into. It's being really mindful.
And I think the other thing that's really occurring to me, and it's really coming up for me right now, is as women, and I know we've got a lot of women on in this session today, kind of tuning in, and I think as women, we are not great at self-care. I would say, I know for me as a business owner, and the first few stages of the pandemic, I was just so knuckled down on how do I just keep this business afloat? What do I need to do? I didn't even think to put vacation time in my calendar at the start of the summer. And always, I'm very good about taking 2 to 3 weeks off every summer. It's a great way for me to replenish. And I've been noticing a few things. I've been noticing, one, people are very resistant to take vacation time because where are we going to go? What are we going to do? We can't go anywhere anyway. So we've got that piece happening. The second piece that we're happening, and there's plenty of research coming out on this, that, this pandemic is setting women in the workplace back so much because who is stepping into school the kids, and who is the one who's picking up all of the, things around the house that, it's definitely not, in many cases, shared labor of responsibility, right? And I think as women, inherently, we are helpers. Like, I'm going to stereotype a gender here, and I know, and if people want to yell at me for doing that, that's fine. But what I notice, and I often coach senior women, and I'll notice how they take accountability for stuff that is not their responsibility. And they're worrying about everybody else's business. And I say, could you please stop momming? Like, I call it momming. I go, stop momming everybody. Like, let them fall and hurt themselves. Like, you cannot be the smother mother. And I think in some cases, what I'm noticing is that it is harder for women to carve out that self-care time because of all the other now pressures that are kind of you know, kind of closing in. So
Yeah.
I guess as a, you know, active, busy mom yourself, who also has a husband who has had, you know, health issues and things like that, how do you make sure you keep yourself, like, how do you keep yourself at the top of the self-care list? And when you notice yourself falling, how do you get yourself back on track?
And I love that. I appreciate that you said that at the end, because I will say, like, I do not do this perfectly. I think that's, you know, impossible to strive for. I do consider myself a recovering perfectionist in a lot of ways. And I think that the other part of it is that I have now learned over all of these years the difference that I feel when I take care of myself and when I don't. And again, and self-care can be like this big thing, like, right, self-care. So this is where I go back to, like, just paying attention to the little things that I do that are equal to self-care and the difference that makes. So that could be when I feel myself getting, like, super stressed and frustrated, like an example of being, you know, I've been working all day and I've been, you know, managing the stuff with the kids, and my anxiety and frustration is going up. And then I've got to get into the kitchen and, you know, make dinner, and I'm feeling frustrated and resentful, and I can feel it going up, right? Now I'm much faster at stopping myself and, like, okay, I'm feeling this way. It doesn't feel good. You know, like, how do I want to feel right now? Well, what I'm realizing is, like, well, I'm feeling resentful because I've been working all day, and the kids, yeah, they've been in school Zoom, you know, but they're capable. I have a 15-year-old and 11-year-old, and my husband, you know, has his own career. But what I'm realizing, like, I will stop myself faster and say, oh, this feeling is not feeling good. It doesn't help me show up the way that I want to show up, which is like, 30 minutes ago, I could have been giving my best to my client and showing up great. And now I'm pissed off and resentful, right? And the interaction. And so what I'm able to do faster is that pause of recognizing that the way I'm feeling doesn't feel good. And that can be emotionally, and sometimes it's physically, you know, it's 3 o'clock and I'm like, oh my God, my energy is just drained. And I'm noticing that and stopping and saying, what do I need right now? So if it's 3 o'clock, sometimes, honestly, when I'm working from home and I'm so drained, I'm like, what do I need right now? I'm like, I need a 20-minute power nap.
Yeah.
Or I need to go sit outside in the sun while I'm in California. It's easy to do that year round, but, you know, or I need to go for a walk around the block, or I need to, you know, connect with somebody, you know, like, it's sort of checking in. That end of the day one, like when I'm in the kitchen and I'm feeling resentful, oftentimes it's, I need to go ask somebody for help. Or I need to go, you know, have a conversation with my husband about, you know, what he can help me with. And I will say, I am somebody too, that, like, I am a firm believer in, I hate to say running my family, but sort of leading the family in the same way that I do professionally, which is, we are a team, right? My husband and I are co-leaders. We are partners in this, and we are a team. And so really looking at, like, how does the team operate so that it's not all falling on one person, me. The times I feel resentful, it's almost always because I am not taking care of myself and I'm not asking for what I need, almost always. And so that part about, like, the self-care, it's really come from noticing the difference from when I do those things versus what I don't. And what I really want people to hear right now is that well-being, which self-care is a component of well-being. If you can actually shift into a belief that is a superpower, like, that is a strategy for success, and success without the resentment, the burnout, right? Like, I feel like success is not really satisfying if it's not sustainable. And I really want to help people feel successful and be able to enjoy that success, not just like, oh, I achieved these things, but, and that's really where my work stemmed from, is I realized that I would, you know, on outward appearances, came across really successful, but I didn't feel successful because when I was with my kids, I felt distracted and resentful and exhausted. And then when I was working, I felt like my energy was low because I wasn't taking care of myself. And so I was kind of pushing through, but not really able to enjoy it. And so I think that it's really that mindset shift for me of realizing through the lens that I show up so differently when I put self-care first. So it's not a nicety. It's not like, oh, I should do this because it's just, I'm being nice to myself. I really look at it as like, this is a necessity for me to be able to show up in the world in the way that I want to. Do I do it 100% of the time? Absolutely not. But the better you're able to come back to it and recenter, even if it's in a moment of being able to come back to a kid or a spouse or somebody on your team and say, the way I handled that wasn't so great. Here's what was going on for me, right? Here's what I'm asking for in the future. Like, that's just as important as being able to do it, well, the first time, is being able to come back and go, I didn't do that so well that time.
But I think this is like everything that I'm hearing you talk about. I mean, I will say to people all the time when they ask me about mindfulness, I will say meditation practice changed my life when I started getting into it 6 years ago. And I think, to me, meditation and mindfulness, it's the, they're one and the same, because it's about being present with yourself. It's about checking in with yourself. It's about understanding what's going on. And you're right. Like we feel it in our body first, right? We have this feeling in our body, and then we can go on autopilot with our actions. And this process of checking in and going, okay, what's going on with me right now?
Yes.
Why
awareness.
did I do that? And awareness is so huge. And I think this idea that often, like, I'm always like, what, you mean you can't read my mind? And, and it is usually where I've not, kept my boundaries, where I have not been clear with myself in terms of what I wanted, or I've made assumptions about situations, and then, building up resentment around that. So I know we're coming up towards the end of our time. So this is, guys, if you have questions that you want to ask Nicola, now's the time to do it. I saw Shelby's thrown one in there. She wants to know, how do you help somebody get on board if they're resistant to self-care? So what if you've got somebody who's not really, like, feeling that they're just fine and they don't need to do this? Any strategies?
Well, I mean, I'm a big believer that giving the bigger why, the purpose for people is important. I think that people have a hard time making, especially changes that are related to behavior, if they can't connect for themselves why that's important.
Right.
So part of it is like how I would answer that's dependent on, the person. But I do think that a big piece of it is, I'm going to just use an example of, like, let's say you have a team member that you really feel like they need to be doing a better job of taking care of themselves, is coming back to this idea about what are their goals in terms of where they want to develop, as a leader, the impact, the presence that they're having on other people, especially if you're noticing, and this is personally or professionally, if you're noticing that somebody not taking care of themselves is impacting the way that they're showing up, right? The energy they're bringing into the room, the way that they're interacting with people, and it's not very positive. I think that being able to have a conversation saying, again, like, here's the experience that I'm having with you, or here's what I'm noticing with you. And I'm wondering, what it is that you're doing in terms of helping manage your stress, especially during these times. I do think that if you are a high achiever and you're so used to just pushing through, right? Especially if things get more challenging, you just push through and you try to control more.
Yeah.
You may need somebody to help reflect back how that is impacting the way that you are showing up. But it may be really hard to look at, well, so I'm going to take time away from working hard to do something for myself, right? And so even finding, there's so much information out there, research out there about using, rest and renewal as a performance strategy, right? So if the goal is to be a high achiever, it's like really giving some information around how taking breaks, how taking care of yourself actually is a success strategy.
Yeah.
If you know somebody really has a desire, let's say, to want to show up more present and positive with their kids, it's reflecting back like, here's what I'm noticing in terms of how you're showing up. And I really think that, you know, just picking one thing a day, that's like your time. It doesn't have to be, you know, a grand gesture. It's really looking for, you know, those little things throughout your day. I believe that creating a ritual is important, right? Like every day, this is how I'm going to start my morning, or how I'm going to end my day, or how I'm going to transition, right? We've lost that like commute transition time. So, you know, even if it's building up a ritual of like, this is how I'm going to transition from my morning to starting work, or from ending work, right, to transitioning to being with my family. So I think how you motivate is going to be different based on what the individual goals are. Again, that's why this is so challenging for me to do like bigger culture stuff, because it's such an individual thing. So those conversations are really, really important to understand what that individual's goal is and then speak to that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think this whole idea of small incremental changes in the right direction, these rituals, these little, which I think is why, you know, the journal that you've developed, the little, you know, the card deck that people can go to, and even create the ritual out of reading, you know, doing something, one thing a day that you can, you know, start to center yourself in. So Nicola, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been like, I cannot believe how fast this conversation
I know.
went
I feel like we could talk forever.
I know. I'm like, and I still have like a whole bunch of questions to ask you, but we will allow people to get back to their day. So I think I've got a couple of just public service announcements. Shelby's going to bring up the deck. I think here we go. Yeah. So those of you who want to learn more about the work that we do at the Roundtable, we help leaders navigate change, disruption, and growth. So boy, are we busy right now. But feel free to reach out. Happy to talk to you about any of our services. We have one seat left in our Roundtable for Leaders open enrollment program. This is going to be done all virtually. If you are a senior director or a VP, or you know somebody who would really benefit from having not only development around their leadership, but I would say a community of support right now, this is the perfect program. And so happy to talk to you more about that. You can email me. Finally, don't forget to grab a copy of my book. You can grab Nicola's book and my book in the same places, I think, on Amazon and on Indigo. So grab a copy and start your own peer group to support you. And then last but not least, we'll be up on February, oh my God, look at me getting ahead of myself, November 11th with Amy Lasky, who is going to join us to have a conversation about communication and how to kind of bring our full self into our work. So looking forward to that. Again, Nicola, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been just a pleasure to have you on the call and to reconnect, not in sunny California, but over Zoom here in Toronto. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to see you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today.